You get the question all the time, what was the Civil War? Was the Civil War about slavery? It depends on who you ask, because if you ask Southerners, non-slave holding Southerners, they will probably say, well, we're just fighting for our rights, you know, to states' rights, where we can do what we want. Okay. You talk to abolitionists in the North, including Douglas, they're going to say, yeah, this thing is about slavery. The Congress in the summer of 1861 declared this thing is only about keeping the Union together. In January of 1863, you start having New York draft riots because folks say, I'll fight for this country, but I'll be damned if I'm going to fight for niggers. So it depends on who you ask. But yet, if you look and say, what is the one single most reason that people would be willing to destroy themselves, it's probably slavery. So, when this thing first kicks off, you know, ain't nobody trying to have no blacks fighting. And do you know why it's a big issue for blacks to defend the country? Because defending the country and full citizenship go hand in hand. Somebody's willing to lay their life down for the country, you can't deny them citizenship. If you look at the history of United States military history, African Americans in the United States military history, you will see that in most of the wars, they did not want blacks. When George Washington took command 2 weeks after Bunker Hill, or was it Lexington? I think it was Lexington. Maybe it was one of the first battles. 2 weeks after, he's calling for recruits. But he doesn't want blacks, didn't want old, don't want extremely young, but he doesn't want blacks. But eventually blacks start fighting. And that's the only time that blacks and whites were able to fight in the army side by side. And it would not happen again until Korea. You get to 1812. They still hesitant about putting guns in black folks' hands because they might decide to turn them guns 180 degrees and start shooting somebody else. But they don't have a problem with blacks in the Navy. So you got a lot of blacks who serve in the Navy. Mexican-American War, blacks are serving as scouts, you know, taking people through, they're doing laborers, but not really military, but they're there. Civil War rolls around, they're not gonna have them. But here's what ends up happening. Here's the beginning of this emancipation thing. 1861, Virginia secedes. The next day, 3 slaves end up at Fort Monroe, which is down there in the Hampton Roads area. Confederate major comes over on behalf of the colonel, says, hey, you got 3 slaves over there? General Benjamin Butler says, yeah. He says, you gonna give them back? He says, no. So you're not going to obey the Fugitive Slave Act? Benjamin Butler says, wait a minute. You guys seceded yesterday. You're not citizens anymore. But if your colonel wants to come over here and swear allegiance to the United States, he can have his slaves back. Of course, it didn't happen. What happens after that, they start coming over by the thousands. So blacks are showing up in 1861. You have the first Confiscation Act, which essentially says that anybody who's a part of this Civil War of the Confederacy, you can confiscate their property particularly if it ends up being a part of their war effort, right? Now here's the one time they're referring to blacks as property, right? But Mr. Lincoln, you know, he's probably got 1 year formal schooling. He ain't no dummy, but he goes on to be one of the greatest leaders of his time. This guy, outside of the presidency, is spending time in the Library of Congress going through war manuals, trying to learn it. He didn't know much when he first got in there, but 4 years later, he's better than some of his own generals. So 1861, 1862, the second Confiscation Act, pretty much saying, you know, you can bring these contraband is the term that Benjamin Butler uses, but it doesn't say they can be in the military. So now, Douglas, who already believes that this thing is over slavery, starts talking to the president. Matter of fact, he meets with Lincoln on 3 occasions.